Hey, and we're live. What's going on, people? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever the heck you are, whatever the heck you're doing. I am delighted that you would choose to spend a little time with me. And today, we're going to go a little deeper than we usually do. Today, we're talking to my friend John Jantsch about the self-reliant entrepreneur. Now, if you don't know John, you're missing out. He's a marketing consultant, a speaker. He's the author of Duct Tape Marketing, the Referral Engine, Duct Tape Selling, the Commitment Engine, and SEO for Growth. And this is fantastic. It's the Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, 366 daily meditations to feed your soul, grow your business, and it taps into the wisdom of 19th century transcendentalist literature and John's own 30-year entrepreneur journey to challenge today's entrepreneur, that's you and me, folks, to remain fiercely self-reliant while chasing their own version of success. And I just love that. So, John, what's going on, man?
Hey, Phil, thanks for having me. Hello out there in internet world.
Yeah. Hello in the internet world. It's crazy. So what was it last year or the year before, John? We finally actually got to spend more than 8 seconds together. I thought that was kind of fun, huh?
You could have told me it was 5 years ago, 4 years ago. I know it just seems like time flies by, but yeah, that's one of the neat things about the community of folks. And I know when we get in this book, we're going to talk about some of the authors that I cited. And one of the things I learned is they were all friends, Hawthorne, Thoreau, Louise May Alcott were actually all friends. And I didn't realize that. You just think, oh, no, they're just writing these books out there. But that's kind of how we all are. We show up at the same conferences and, we connect in things like this. And that's, that's what that's how community is built.
Yeah, we have our own little virtual salon. That's pretty darn cool, I think, that we hang out and we get to talk and help each other, support each other and good stuff like that. And I think as an entrepreneur, right, that's one of the most important things that we can do before we even get to talking about the book is that we need to find our tribe, right? That's such an overused term, but I think it's so important that we find those. So, John, tell me back 30 years ago when you started, I mean, how did you do that, man, back 30 years ago? Or were you totally just all you all the time?
No, if you think about what was going on, I mean, we didn't have the internet from a marketing, standpoint. Obviously, none of the social networks, were around. I mean, you weren't nearly as global, of course, unless you had a job as a sales manager for a company that was all over the world. You did the same kind of networking things that we do today. You just didn't have the reach, you didn't have the access to people, but you certainly the chambers of commerce, the types of networking and things existed then as well. But what I love about the platforms that we have today, when used correctly, they really allow you to make or build some relationships, not only farther, but I think in a lot of ways faster. I mean, if you and I meet at a conference and then we have tools like this to stay connected, to help us stay connected till we see each other the next time. I just did an interview with a mutual friend of ours, Mitch Joel. Mitch and I, there was a time there where it seemed like every conference we were both on the agenda. I haven't seen Mitch in maybe a year and a half, but we've done these kinds of things to stay connected.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. It's great to think about how much the internet has really sped up our process. So, John, I got to ask though, man, this is for me, it feels like such a departure for you to move from hardcore marketing sales into transcendental kind of, meditation, if you will. Because really, when I think about this book, it is a series. If I were to recommend how people read this, I'd recommend they take the day and really put that day into practice every day. But where did that come from, man? Because that's not duct tape marketing. Is it duct tape self-actualization or what?
This is actually my sixth book, and as you've noted, my 5 other books have been squarely in some aspect of how to do marketing. But I happen to think that entrepreneurship is probably the greatest personal development program ever created. And so, I've been on my own, personal development journey for, a couple decades, I think. And so this book in some ways is a reflection of my own journey, but also the work I've done with thousands of entrepreneurs that I work with and have chosen to work with what are some of the smallest businesses. And, we get into their marketing stuff, but, who they're being is a big part of their marketing, out there in the world. And so, sometimes I feel like some of the best work I can do is if If you can build a better you, that's going to be a really great guide to build a better business. And, let's face it, the how-to information is so available, to any search on YouTube, and you can construct an atomic bomb. It's available today. What I think is sometimes lacking is the kind of why-to information, the mindset stuff. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate, the physical, mental, spiritual toll of doing this joyful thing, take. And so I do think that practice, and I kind of talk about this book as a practice of just kind of checking in every day, working on, building your trust, your courage, your confidence, your resilience, is something that I think we have to do intentionally.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know that this past year has really been quite the new practice journey for me, John. I've, lost a lot of weight and found a lot of happiness in my life. And it's really interesting because it is a daily choice. And so part of that daily practice for me is practicing gratitude. But with this, I mean, that's what I think is really cool, right? Like if we open up today, December 13th, to being noble, right? Be noble in the nobleness that lies in other men sleeping, but never dead, will rise in majesty to meet thine own. Then wilt thou see it gleam in many eyes. Then will pure light around thy path be shed. Thou wilt never be sad and lone. From James Russell, Sonnet 4. And then you've got a little thing to think about here. Nothing very challenging about today's reading other than a smog of the classic portrayal of the hero having an occasional big noble moment, no matter what a slacker they've been the rest of the movie. No, Lowell is talking about being noble, everyday noble, not doing a noble thing. And I love the reframe, but then you challenge us with a question. And I think this is so smart, right? What is the most noble act you've witnessed? And then how did it impact you at the time? And if I think about that, I mean, I can read that. That's about 47 seconds or so. That's easy. I can commit to 47 seconds. But really, if I do that first thing in the morning as part of my daily practice, and then I really think on that, and as I get space in my day, as I add margin in my day, and I get 5 minutes in a meeting that ended earlier, 10 minutes in a training that ended, or a coaching client that doesn't show up or whatever, then I can really go deep on that. And I can think like, how am I being noble? Like, are my actions really the actions of a nobleman or really the actions of a coward? And I really think that's super important. And that's fascinating that would be today's choice. So I'm going to guess, John, that you've journeyed, right? Like, so who's your favorite Stoic or Transcendental author? Who are you reading?
Well, I never like to pick on any favorites because they're all my children now. But Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau appear probably more often than anyone in the book. One of the things that was fun about digging into the literature to anchor this book is that I also discovered a lot of people that I was not familiar with. A lot of female authors at the time their work didn't see the light of day. Frankly. Yeah. It has since been collected in letters and journals and things like that. Margaret Fuller is a great example. Willa Cather is somebody that I was familiar with, but I loved her work when I dug in a little deeper. Louisa May Alcott. Most people are familiar with Little Women, and I think that's a great book, but she was quite as well in her letters and her writing, and particularly the women authors at the time, they were marching in the streets to get the right to vote. That was really the beginning of the women's movement, and so there were some voices that were very frustrated, of course, with the way things were at the time. That some of those conditions still exist today, I think, but it was really fun to kind of study and go deeper than the Pinterest boards and the Instagram quotes for some of these works that are quite familiar with a lot of folks. I dug deeper, or at least that was my goal, was to dig much deeper and to get into things like their letters and journals as well.
Yeah, I think to your point, right? That's the why they did what they did. Because if all we do is have the quote, all we do is have the pull, well, that's nice, but there's no context there. I mean, that sounds so trite. But like it ends up being just a platitude instead of really a feeling and a movement and that why that drives us forward. I mean, that's, when I think about my days, I really think how important it is that I go back to my why and I go back to my roots, right? Like, why am I doing this? Why do I love to train salespeople? It's because they serve at a higher level because they sell things that people need and desire. And I really think that's important. So really cool. And Charmaine says that was beautiful. So we got some feedback on that. Thank you, John, for writing that. So you mentioned going deeper, though. I mean, deeper than a Google search. So did you actually go to a physical library, John, or how did you find these?
Oh man, I did. I kiddingly say that I got a master's. I won't go the PhD route, but I got a master's in mid-19th century literature. I spent a lot of time in libraries. I spent a lot of time in actually some private libraries that are not, that are collections of people's work. But all of this work is old enough that it's in the public domain, places like Project Gutenberg as well. So I certainly spent a lot of time there. There's also one of the things that's a little tough. I actually had a couple transcendentalist scholars look at some of the quotes because there's a terrible amount of misattributed information out there. So if you just go to WikiQuote or something, you're probably not, going to find what you're looking for. There are a lot of very, very, common things that are attributed to Emerson in particular, and so I'm not suggesting that there aren't some, mistakes and misattributions in this, but I worked pretty hard at making sure that it was fairly pure.
Cool. So you mentioned some of the folks that you've mentioned a lot, but who's one that maybe surprised you that really you enjoyed once you did a little more?
Well, I was not familiar with Margaret Fuller at all. Okay. And turns out anybody who has studied, feminist literature is probably quite familiar with her. But her writing was certainly very forceful. I mean, in what they were trying to do in terms of, really changing some things. But she also just had a way to I think, write very beautifully.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really neat. Yeah. And that period of time, right? The suffragette movement that was a big deal. That really changed our whole country. And so it's awesome that you're able to break that down and then make that relevant for us as entrepreneurs, which
you think about what else was going on at the time. I mean, we were also on the cusp of the Civil War. We were trying to abolish slavery. I mean, it was really the first countercultural period in America. And that's why so much of the literature was very overt about, hey, you need to start thinking for yourself. We don't need to listen to the preacher or our parents or our teacher or the politicians. We need to follow our heart. And I think that in a lot of ways, the reason that vein of literature resonates so much with me is because I still today think that's amazing entrepreneurs. They were not writing for entrepreneurs. I mean, in fact, the fiction at the time that we all had to read, Moby Dick and Scarlet Letter and Little Women, it was the first time you had protagonists in American literature that were showing up, basically saying, this might cost me everything, but I have to do it. And I think that's why that literature has stood the test of time. I think it is even though we have all this new technology and distractions, I think the human condition is the same, and encouraging people to follow their heart, to have empathy for others who are doing that as well, I think is amazing advice. I was one of the things that really, I would stop, time and time again and go, how could that have been written 150 years ago? That is so, relevant and applicable for, today, and I think that's really why the literature has stood the test of time.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it is interesting to think about the parallels between then and now, because we're seeing a lot of the same stuff. I mean, people are not trusting authority like they once did. And we see people like, no, you must trust. I don't know. I think that's really fascinating how, things kind of come full circle and we see that. So there was a lot. I mean, there still is a lot of risk, right?
Yeah, I mean, on that last point, I think that, I didn't write this book because of that, but there's no question there's some parallels to, maybe how divided and, culturally and politically we are right now, to that period of history. There certainly are historians and researchers that talk about this kind of every fourth generation, type of thing. And I do think that we are on the cusp of some sort of upheaval. That's going to have to happen. And again, I don't want to take us down the political rabbit hole, but you just look at the news today right now, and it's just, it's so polarizing. And I think that, I believe that entrepreneurs have been kind of a source of goodness. I mean, we're trying to solve problems. We're trying to change things that, that are wrong. And so, this idea of self-reliant entrepreneurs, I think an army of self-reliant entrepreneurs is what we need to maybe bring some unity back to us as a people.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, I think that's so darn important because that's all we have, right? That when we really think about it, that is at our core. That's why we started a business, right? Because there was a need, we filled it in, and now we see that there's value to be delivered, and we spend some time each and every day trying to deliver that value. And I think that's super important and often overlooked as an entrepreneur because we are, what is it? Small business powers, 75, 80% of the economy?
Yeah.
And yet big business really drives the political spectrum. Yeah. So it's really interesting.
Except in an election year, then everybody cares about us small businesses.
Yeah, they say they do. Let's be clear. They don't. That's okay. You're being much nicer than I will. So they don't care. So yeah. But so John, so let's dig a little deeper on some of that, right? Because I really think there's so much that we could talk about. But let's talk a little bit more about what it means really to be self-reliant in an age when we're hyper connected.
Yeah. So a lot of times when people think in terms of self-reliance, they, if you Google the term self-reliance, you're going to find websites that'll tell you how to build your own house and make your own clothes and, can be completely a loner and independent. And that's not really what I'm suggesting, at least. That's not what Emerson suggested in his essay, Self-Reliance. I think we're more, what the idea of self-reliance is that you develop a level of trust in your own ideas, in your own journey, so much so that others, can no longer control, their actions and their words, no longer kind of control what you believe you in your heart and your unique person should do. But it also, in doing so, in realizing that, hey, all I can do is follow my path. All I can do is control how I show up and how I respond, to what happens to me in the world. I think it also offers a level of empathy to other people doing the same. One of the kind of tenets of the entire transcendentalist movement, they Emerson and Thoreau clearly had studied some of the Eastern wisdom texts that were that are very rooted in the idea that we're all connected, that we're all all living things are connected, which of course I think is a very almost mainstream thinking today, but you think in the 1850s that was pretty radical when people were preaching a very secular religion. So that idea of developing a level of trust and awareness in the things that you can control, I do believe is how you're going to have more joy and happiness in the business, regardless of where you're trying to go. But I also think, as I said, I also think it allows you to have more empathy for people that are doing the same thing, following their own path, even if you don't understand or agree with perhaps their path.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Empathy is often the hidden ingredient in so many successful entrepreneurs, because having that empathy allows us then to kind of, move quickly and yet move with deliberation to go where we need to go to serve the right people. And if we focus on our why, right, we get back to that. We get back to our why. Your book completely aligns, as we talk about that, with everything else you've done, John, which I think is brilliant.
Well, that's right. I mean, a lot of people have talked about this idea of, well, this is so different. Is this a risk for you to take this, this approach? And I feel like this is and probably the only risk would have been not to write this book, because it is what was in my heart.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the cool part about the book is that I love that you split it into 4 parts that align with our seasons, which makes so much sense, right? Planning, discovering, evolving, and growing, which is, this 4 seasons of life, the 4 seasons of our business. So if you're a new business owner and you pick up this book, I would tell you, don't feel like you have to start in the day. Instead, start in the season that makes the most sense for you and start there, right? You don't have to read this book in order, but I do think it's instructive if you're thinking about, hey, where would I start? I would start with the planning stage, because that's so important, even maybe before you start your business. What do you think about that, John?
Yeah. And one of the things that the reason I structured it this way was, obviously in an annual book, the season metaphor was there for the taking. But I've seen these stages show up in my entrepreneurial journey over and over again. So this isn't like you plan this and then you do this. In some ways, when I've had a new idea, when I've had a new book, when I wanted to go into a new market, I mean, it's almost like these stages show up, where you have to kind of go, is this the right idea? Do I trust that I'm going the right direction? Then you have to kind of go out there and do some discovery with maybe a client or a potential client. And that's when I think in some ways start discovering like, what's the purpose of this? And then, the season of fall for a lot of people is when they kind of start getting some momentum. Their idea, it's like, hey, this is working. But ironically, that's the place sometimes that some element of failure starts to show up. You hadn't planned on it a certain way. It actually got too much traction. People weren't willing to pay the price that you thought they would. And that's the place where, you have to be resilient enough to understand that, hey, I didn't fail or, I'm not bad. But this specific thing, showed up to teach us something. And I think the entrepreneurs that kind of move through that and then really ultimately end up, at the place that does kind of match, what they want to do with people that want them to do it. That's when I think you start kind of going into that, what I would call the last season. And now you're a little more focused maybe on what difference am I making? What impact is this having? And so the book is structured in that kind of way as a narrative arc. I don't know that somebody would just jump in the book and go, oh, I'm in that season. It's not probably quite that overt, but it gave it a narrative arc. It helped me kind of think in terms of, those stages that have showed up in my life time and time again.
Well, I think that's great. I think it also doesn't give us topical whiplash, which is really nice, because that's always a concern, right? Especially in a book that could potentially be 366 distinct ideas. Yeah. Which could be like, holy crap, John, where'd you go?
And to that point, I actually further broke it down to the months. Each month actually does have an overarching theme. And I'll be honest, those months occurred to me, those themes occurred to me as important in that season, but it also gave me an organizational tool. As I started writing this and reading and doing the research, I quickly realized that, how was I going to organize, even my collection of thoughts? And so I think you're absolutely right. It does help people kind of stay with the flow of the book, but it also helped me organize, the over 400 readings that I cite.
Awesome. That's awesome. I love that, John. The structure makes perfect sense to me. So is there one day that, and maybe that's in the book, that you have that you think today maybe stands out to you that you'd like to share, or that you'd like me to look up and read a little bit about?
No, you know what? That's a good one. Somewhat at random. I'm going to pick one. I'm going to pick September 17th. Thoreau shows up in this book a lot. I need to someday count and see actually who shows up the most. My guess would be a race between Emerson and Thoreau. Today is September 17th I'm reading. The title is Into the Wild. Think of our life in nature, daily to be shown matter, to come into contact with it, rocks, trees, wind on our cheeks, the solid earth, the actual world, the common sense. Contact. Who are we? Where are we? It was from Henry David Thoreau's essay, The Maine Woods, which was written in 1864. When you think of Thoreau, you likely think of nature, wilderness, and preservation. After all, shortly after his death, Atlantic Magazine published his essay, Walking, in which he boldly states, "In wilderness is the preservation of the world." But Thoreau lived most of his life in a city. Even as he retired to Walden Pond, he still made the short walk to Concord for his mother's cookies and chances to dine with friends. The point is that although Thoreau advocated the preservation of wilderness, he also acknowledged that nature is as much a part of us as we are of it. In a journal, he mused, "It is in vain to dream of a wilderness distant from ourselves." So for Thoreau, wilderness was a point of view as much as a place. How we think about new adventures allows us to create our own wilderness. Our job is to explore the unknown and to come into contact with it, rocks, trees, wind on our cheeks, the solid earth. Fight through the fear and enter your unknown wilderness just to discover what's there. This is how we continue to know who we are and where we are. Your challenge question today, what's something you'd like to do now but have been afraid to try?
Wow. I think that's a great way to end us here, John. What's something new that you want to do, but you've been afraid to try? So folks, if you're thinking about something new, drop a comment here. I'm going to leave a copy, leave a link to get a copy of the book from John. And I've got one copy to give away. So if you're interested in that, just leave a comment. Let me know why you'd be interested in the book. If September 17th resonates with you, December 13th, or something else resonates with you, or you had a question. I'll pick somebody at random to get a copy of the book. I encourage you to, reach out to me, reach out to John, see how we can help. John, if people want to connect with you, if they want to ask you some more questions, what's the best way for them to do that?
So it's just John at ducttapemarketing.com is an email. Duct Tape is where you can find all the work I've been doing for the last couple decades. If you want to just find more about the book itself, interviews like this exist there. It is just Self-Reliant Entrepreneur.com. I'm on all the socials as Duct Tape Marketing, with the exception of Twitter, where my handle is just Duct Tape, because when I joined Twitter, that's as long as your handle could be. They've opened that up now, but you'll probably find me if you type in Duct Tape Marketing pretty much anywhere.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, John. It's a great book. The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur is fantastic, folks. Get a copy of it. Get to know John Jantsch more. He's fantastic, and I'm just grateful that he spent some time with us today. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Phil. It was fun.
Yeah, my pleasure.